Sam Altman is betting on the one-person billion-dollar company, and Dario Amodei gives it 80% odds this year. Block just cut 4,000 people because AI can perform a wider range of tasks. And a Microsoft study found workers are applying zero critical thinking to nearly half of what they hand AI. The industry is racing to replace human thinking, and we're basically handing our thinking and jobs back to the AI. So here's the question nobody's asking. If AI can replace everyone, what are businesses and products actually worth? Helen and Dave Edwards have spent 10 years studying what AI does to humans, not what it does for them. They founded the Artificiality Institute, built a transdisciplinary community of scientists, designers, and philosophers, and are publishing Stay Human, a book on reclaiming your cognition in the age of AI. Today you'll hear why cognitive sovereignty is the competitive advantage nobody's measuring, why the one-person billion-dollar company is a fantasy that breaks down the moment you do the math, and what the products getting it right have in common, and why the most important metric in AI might be one we haven't invented yet. Enterprises are struggling to scale the value of AI products. AI product licenses go unused, and teams struggle to create value. The data is bleak. $490 billion in enterprise AI spending is delivering nothing. Introducing AI Value Acceleration, the consultancy specializing in enterprise value creation. Make sure that your spending doesn't go to waste, and find out exactly where the value creation of adopting AI products stalls. AI Value Acceleration offers 3 services. Value assessment. In 3 weeks, get clarity on where value is being created, lost, and why. Value amplification. Go deep and build a playbook that learns from power users and identifies new workflows. And value acceleration. Prove what works and how your vendors must improve their platform for you. Learn more at aivalueacceleration.com or look in the show description for info.
Hello, Helen and Dave. Thank you so much for joining us. You've been researching AI and, more importantly, the question of what is AI doing to us for the last 10 years. So why was that something that you felt was worth dedicating your lives to in a time where AI was hardly even on people's radars?
The short answer to that is it was quite obvious to us a long time ago that AI potentially is a very different kind of technology because it has a degree of agency and decision-making of its own. And that is quite a different kind of feedback loop between human intelligence and machine intelligence. So we came to this from trying to answer the question for our about to be looking at colleges children of what to study in college. And that became this pursuit of what is it that humans really do and what is it that AI can do for us. That is still our sort of grounding idea, our grounding organizational philosophy, if you like.
When we think about AI and tech today, the conversation seems really oversimplistic. We talk about performance, we talk about capabilities, we talk about the possibilities of AI. It feels like the deeper conversation of what it's doing to us, what it's doing to the way we work, what it's doing to communities is missing. Now, I know that's part of what your institute and your summit tackle. Can you help us understand why you picked those specifically and the type of people that go there and the conversations happening?
I agree. The conversation can be quite simplistic. And part of it is that the industry is trying to solve human work, trying to solve human society, trying to solve everything as if everything is datafied. Everything can be datafied, which means everything can be quantified, which means everything can be optimized. Everything can be reduced essentially down to ones and zeros. And that puts us quite at odds with their view because we look at the world of humans as complex and messy and beautiful. And we have a positive view that the mess is actually what makes being human so interesting. But I think we also have a realistic view that being human is messy. It isn't something that can be purely simplified. So we look at what the industry wants to see all of this as tech that can be optimized down to little tasks. And we think about it as much more of the holistic idea of what makes being human so interesting and rich and still at this point quite unknown. We don't really understand everything about us or why we do things together the way we do and how it works and it doesn't work. So our community, the people who follow us, read us, come to our summit, come to other events, are those who are really interested in humanity and understanding it in a different way and understanding what AI might be able to do for us. So we have a very transdisciplinary approach to it all. There's everything from biologists to neuroscientists to data scientists, obviously, to cognitive scientists. There's a lot of those philosophers, designers, artists. We have musicians and a variety of photographers coming this year to give a presentation. So it's a really rich and interesting group of people who really want to come together and truly just understand what this next chapter of being human is going to be about.
Thank you for listening to the Product Impact Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow us and leave a comment to inform the conversation.
So it feels like right now, people have to come out fully against AI and its expected negative impacts or fully buy into the hype of it. And the two of you get to hear some of those unbiased conversations that are happening from within tech. So what would you say are some of the real conversations that you're hearing? Like, what are business leaders worried about or excited about? And what are they doing to improve the positive impacts of AI that our listeners don't often hear about?
That's a good question. I think it depends on who they're talking to, because the audience matters, and what the audience wants to hear and the frame the audience wants to hear it in matters. And that speaks to the tension we were just talking about, which is, where are we on the spectrum of fully uncertain and complex and emergent versus we're trying to optimize everything down to a single right answer and reduce uncertainty. And that tension exists in every single conversation. I think we seem to be at a point of particular polarity in this discussion, which isn't that surprising because, in fact, it's not surprising at all to me. I've been waiting for sort of quite a deep backlash to happen against AI, because the kind of key leaders have made a real project out of talking about human replacement. And it's not surprising that humans don't really like that story unless they're part of doing the replacing. So anyone who's surprised by the backlash probably needs a little bit more education in how humans work, because this is exactly what we'd expect. The point that you were making before about the complexity of the conversation and the polarity in the conversation, we think about this as trying to break it down into the various component parts that give us this complexity. So helping make it clear to people that there are very good reasons why humans have particular ways of using technology. And some of those reasons are almost they're biological imperatives. We're trying to be more efficient ourselves. We're trying to be more efficient in the way that we think and the way that we engage in the world. But that efficiency and that need to use what we already know and just get better at it is always in tension with the desire for new information or to go out into the world to gain information to reduce a future uncertainty, to reduce surprise in the future, to understand the world better. And those two things are inherently in tension. And it is one of the key reasons why we can't possibly believe in AI replacing everything about humans, because that is just not how our thinking and how our biological drives actually work. Having said that, that of course then sits in contrast with someone says, look at this, today Opus 4.6 can now do 14 and a half hours of coding without stopping and without a human, and it's really reliable. And you go, okay, that's great. That's good. That's a really interesting data point. But let's go through all the steps that mean that that is not the same as replacing a 14 and a half hour task that a human does. But a lot of people, those are complex conversations. You have to really get into the detail. What we try and do across all of our work is demonstrate these complexities, demonstrate how you can't reduce everything to linear sets of tasks, because it's just not how the world works. So we're quite humble. We're quite humble in the face of this uncertainty. And a lot of what we do is try and build out a more rich picture of what it is that we can do with AI. And once people see that enhancing your own cognition using AI is possible and is good, and here's what it means to do that and how to do that, it's almost like people drop this binary machines versus humans. They drop this kind of frame of competition, and they more naturally see it as one of collaboration and cooperation, and we use terms like symbiosis, where we will find new things. And so we question these quite honestly idiotic assumptions that we know everything there is to know about the world, and that human intelligence is obsolete because machines can do this, that, and the other things, so they'll be able to do everything. These are the kinds of slippery slope arguments that just keep the conversation stuck in these binary reactions, because in the end, people feel like they have to defend something. They either have to defend their thesis of machines taking over, or they have to defend what it means to be human without technology. And both of those ends of the spectrum are just a room, which is why I think we're seeing some of this discourse get pretty damn frenetic right now.
Do you feel like that discourse is moving towards a more optimistic lens, where people in leadership positions are starting to come to those conversations with the lens of we need to improve the positive impact of what we're doing? Or do you feel like it's still on that defensive side where they're trying to defend the choices and minimize the risk?
I think that, at least from a public standpoint, the leaders of the AI companies are not really changing the tunes much at all. They're describing a future of raising capital to build data centers, to train models that will create a value that will be returned to them by replacing labor. This is capital replacing labor. That is the model that they've created, which is an unfortunate one, and it's really unimaginative, because all they see is that the economy is one size. And so in order to enter it with this new thing, they're basically saying that they're going to replace human labor with it, rather than coming up with something else for AI to do that is not what a human actually does. There is some level of movement on some of the topics, I'd say. There is some reinforcement of what has been a pretty solid green mindset about energy usage for data centers. At least some of the major tech companies have worked on sourcing renewable energy for their data centers, and they're reinforcing that with AI. It's not universal, but it's definitely positive. There's more movement towards running data centers and closed loop cooling systems rather than using fresh water. So they're responding to from society broadly in terms of consumption. But in terms of what the models do, the impact on individuals, the impact on jobs, the impact on the economy, I haven't really seen much of a shift from the senior level. Now, that's different from the people inside some of the companies. You're starting to see some people come out and leave and make statements and write articles. There was the person who left Anthropic who said they were leaving to go study poetry, which is going to definitely catch a headline. But people are interested. They're starting to deal with sort of an ethical dilemma, and they're starting to talk much more. It's not as public as the big statements, but I think there is some level of recognition and real grappling that's happening from the people throughout the large companies.
And the sound bites, there's almost this sort of level of split personality, in the sense that on one hand, take Anthropic. You've got Anthropic with a strong marketing campaign about keep thinking. But then you've got the CEO being really clear that he thinks that 50% of entry-level jobs will be gone in 4 years, by 2030. What will those people be thinking?
Yeah.
So the difference between what the researchers and scientists say on the front lines of what the model capabilities actually are versus what the marketing people are trying to hold together to keep people it's somewhat positive in general about the role of AI, but we're seeing a natural pushback to human agency here. And it is it is couched as machine agency, but it's essentially company agency. It's what the companies are trying to do to get their return on investment. And none of this will retreat at all, given the capital raising requirements, given talk about IPO, and given the cultural, political domain that we're in, which is really any kind of restraint of AI is seen as a bad thing. So we're seeing people stepping in and feeling like they want to be part of a move to a more healthy relationship with the technology. And I'm using the word healthy in a very broad sense. I have my own particular set of meanings around what that healthiness means. It's an unfortunate place that we're in, because it doesn't actually have to be this way. It doesn't have to be as adversarial as machines are taking over and humans are actually not very good at anything, and we're all biased and we make terrible decisions. And wouldn't it be better if everything was able to be done by machines? That's just a dumb place to be, because nobody really wants that.
Now, if we look at the public discourse, how this conversation is perceived, I can imagine that many average people think that the way we discuss this is very academic and perhaps elitist. Now, I'm wondering what you believe the big conversation will be 1 year from now, perhaps at your conference. Will it be, there's a chart that came out this week from Benjamin Tenenbaum that showed basically 84% of the world has never touched AI. But equally so, there's conversations like there was basically a fan fiction or a sci-fi fiction thing that came out yesterday from the Citrini investment guy talking about what happens when the S&P drops because unemployment shoots up because AI. Now, these are conversations that they're rather tactile. An average person can feel them. They can imagine what it feels like to be impacted by AI in the sense of we're elevating these people out of poverty is a narrative that's discussed in North America a lot. And then this other piece that we're going to throw everybody into poverty. So if we think a year from now, what's going to be the governing conversation that probably will happen and in your summit as well?
I tell you what I hope happens, because none of this happens in a vacuum. It's people actually acting to make things happen. So this is what we're acting on to make things happen, which is to help people understand how AI is changing them. When they use AI, how it changes their thinking, how it changes their identity, and how it changes their meaning making and sense of what is meaningful to them. And that can go well or it can go badly. And there's no surprise there. And we study what moderates those different outcomes. What is it about, whether it's AI design or AI use or the particular mindset that you bring to AI, that drives you in one direction or the other? And the overarching idea for us is, how do we maintain, preserve, expand our cognitive sovereignty, that we're able to set and advance our own goals as individuals, as partners, as co-workers in the collective of humans? How do we use AI to do that better? And we have we do have this biological imperative to offload our cognition, and that's fine. We do that all the time. We do it with pen and paper. We do it with all sorts of things. But doing it with AI is a question in our mind, just how different is this to do it with this compressed representation of all of human knowledge that is now able to do things on its own, make decisions on its own? And we look at this from this perspective of cognitive sovereignty, and we say, what are the things that moderate that and govern that? What's the spectrum of awareness and agency and accountability that we want to develop so that we get smarter? There is no point having this technology if it makes us dumber, and if it makes us less kind, if it makes us more lonely, if it makes us less able to show up for others. So that's the conversation that we're driving. In a year from now, I think we'll be having a lot more of this kind of conversation. If you see it now, there is an enormous amount of popular press starting to come up with, here's how to use AI to not be dumb. Here's how to be a good critical thinker with AI. I've noticed a significant increase in these articles and everything from Fortune and Fast Company and Inc. and all of those kinds of publications are now starting to support that level of conversation. Our research goes a lot deeper into that, and we're publishing Stay Human at the moment. Every week there's a new chapter. It's a very approachable, personal, story-driven book that puts our research out for more people to actually see that it's not even just about their thinking, it's about their whole identity, their professional identity, It's about how they relate to their kids. It's about how they relate to their kids' teachers, their doctors, their lawyers, all of these professional service providers who are also using AI, their co-workers, and how it's changing what we feel we can be and what we feel we can do. So those higher order capacities should be advanced by this technology. They can, like with anything in AI, it can go the other way. It is always the thing that amplifies and the thing that polarizes. So in a year from now, I think we'll be talking a lot more about how we can be using AI to make us better thinkers, to make us better team players, that make us to heighten our professional grounding. What is it that makes us more professionally grounded in our professional standards and expertise? And how is it that we can use this technology to actually cross boundaries? At the moment, there's an understandable obsession with vibe coding. It's a very important phenomenon that has arrived. What does it really mean? It means that long tail of things that no one ever cared about is now able to be done by the person who's the end user. You can vibe code up something that only you care about, that you would never have had Salesforce even care about your problem. So what is that going to do to our capacity to get valuable things out into the world, at the same time as what will it do to our capacity to be paid for those things, or for other people to be paid for those things? Those are very big open questions that I think actually really are sitting below all of this conversation, but people only dip into them and then they come back out of them, and they dip into them and they come back out of them. But the big question will be, what will be our economic value to each other if anybody can do anything?
Let me go back to the things that you brought up in your question, because there's 2 points in there. I think one was the 84% of the world hasn't used AI, which would mean generative AI, right? So we're not talking about the broad
Google or
of it,
social
which
media,
includes search results and social media and all of that, because that number is pretty small in terms of percentage of people who haven't used it at all, because that means that you're not connected to the internet.
I mean, they're basically talking about chatbots.
They're talking about chatbots. They're also talking about chatbots as a standalone. I believe that's what it was, as a standalone application, not as chatbot within some other system, which is increasingly the way this is going to happen. Then there's also the question of, if only a small number of people have used it, how could it have such a large economic impact? Start with the first one. The economic impact for the internet really started to be thought of as an important thing to pay attention in the summer of 1995, when Netscape went public. At that time, there were only 9 million people on the internet. So that I can't do the math off the top of my head because I can't remember what the population was in 1995, but it's a much smaller fraction than 16% of the population today. So remember that when technologies start, they generally start with relatively small numbers of people. This technology, however, has gotten to be a much larger percentage of the global population much faster than anything else we've seen before. So it still has a big one. The second part, in terms of the economic impact, it's important to understand where this technology is being used in the economy and why it's being used, and what the proposition is, the marketing value that's coming from the technology companies about what labor will be replaced. We're generally now looking at mostly knowledge work tasks. That doesn't mean that it's only the task of someone who sits at a computer all day, but it's that kind of work. We're not really thinking about how this world of generative AI is going to be involved much in anything that involves the physical body, right? There's a lot of hypothetical advances in robotics. Spend a little time looking into how hard it is to do certain things. The human body is an incredible evolutionary invention. The fact that you can use the same hand to pick up something really heavy and also something really fragile and not break it, and you just learn that has confounded roboticists for their entire careers as they try to figure this stuff out. But it's hitting at that knowledge economy level. That's a problem for anywhere in that sort of larger world of what the global world has become. That's definitely challenging the middle to higher income jobs more disproportionately than anything else. It's also going to affect the United States economy disproportionately, as we've shifted to be a knowledge economy over the last some number of decades. We're dependent on this kind of work. That's the work that these tools are theoretically going to be able to replace. And that's why there's this question about what might happen if that happens. The downside scenario is terrifying, and we're stuck constantly wondering why the AI leaders think that this is a good idea to make a product that they think will collapse the economy, right? No one succeeds at that when it collapses the economy. And no one succeeds in that world. Even they won't necessarily succeed if what they do is create three major models that run the economy, and they all do basically the same things because they're creating a commodity themselves. There's no value in commodity businesses. So unless you have a structural cost advantage, it's terrible business to invest in, right? It's a state, could be steady state, but you have no premium to your evaluation. So that doesn't make any sense here. You also have the basic problem that collapsing the economy, no one succeeds when the economy collapses. No company actually gets through that very well. So it's confusing that they take the approach of, we're making a product, it's going to destroy the economy, but somebody else will figure it out. Whereas I stop and go, you think you're going to make something that's going to destroy the economy? How about stop and make something else? Because that's not a good trajectory for you. I think it is an important part of the dynamic, and I'm glad to see that people are really paying attention. Our general answer is, that's a terrible path. It doesn't have to be that way. We don't have to make AI into these products. The way that they're being delivered is clearly only one way to deliver them. That is not at all of the possibilities about how this technology could be beneficial to humans and not put people out of work, to actually grow the economy, to advance on this sort of human advantage that we have. We can do that, but maybe not the way we're doing it today.
This episode was brought to you by PH1. Founded in 2012, PH1 is the expert consultancy that empowers your team to ship products that are proven to deliver impact in the AI era. PH1 specializes in measuring the impact of AI products, improving performance of LLM-powered products, and working with leadership to define an AI vision and product strategy. PH1's clients have included Spotify, Microsoft, Mozilla, National Football League, Hims and Hers, various government agencies, and various universities, amongst others. PH1 is the expert you need to prove that your next release will deliver the impact you need. Visit ph1.ca.
Our mission here is really to discuss the impact of this technology on people, businesses, communities, but it feels like we're poorly equipped to do that right now. If you look at the technocrats, they have a lot of computational data. They have these benchmarks. If you look at like the neocons, they'll think about how people were elevated out of poverty. If you look at the financiers, they think about all new products, new investments. And obviously from the policymakers, they look at this as an arms race. Now, everyone else is lacking a true KPI, some measure to track the human outcomes. What should we be looking at? What can we align on? And what is it we need to be focused on over the next 2, 3, 4 years to ensure these negative outcomes don't come to be, or that at least we can measure them?
I put out a piece over the weekend where it's a bit provocative intentionally, where I asked the question of, if AI can replace the humans in your business, does your business have any value at all? Because there's certain assets to a business, right? And there's a certain level that sort of builds up when you're thinking about as an investor, it comes up to book value of whatever kind of business you are. That's just like what the assets are on the books. And then there's some sort of premium in terms of what the value of your business is. It could be because of the brand. It could be the relationships that you have. It could be have the strategic insight to be able to do things slightly differently. It can be in R&D. It can be in all of these other things. I would argue that the vast majority of that is about human intelligence and human cognition and the system of humans that works within those organizations. And I think that any executive who says that they could dramatically change their costs because they're going to eliminate humans and they're going to use AI that anybody else can buy for $20 a month on data that is probably not anywhere near as proprietary as they think it is, then what competitive advantage do you have? What value do you actually have? Because the value of that business is about the people in the organization and the decisions that those people make. So I would like to say, from our little corner of this debate up in the mountains of Oregon, to say that I would love to have the debate and the discussion in the next couple of years about the fact that the value of companies is tied to the humans in those organizations and how those humans use AI to their benefit, how they amplify their own human advantage using AI, but not have it be about which company is going to be most successful at cutting their headcount and replacing it with these robots.
And I look at the flip side. I go, we have an enormous amount of metrics around things that we understand how to measure and that are they're complicated, but in the end, they boil down to some the things that we have solved before, I would be looking for more metrics that show that we're able to solve more complex problems. That's the whole point of this technology, is to be able to solve more complex problems, because we have better insight into high dimensional patterns. We have better insight into what could be good causal interventions in terms of incentives or disincentives, and that we start to think about how we can bring more dimensions into our problem solving and not have to distill everything down to one pure efficiency measure, which we can see this already happening in science. Is a really interesting place to actually watch what's been happening with AI. A paper was published in Nature maybe a month or so ago and I think it was done by James Evans out of University of Chicago, where they looked at how AI is making individual scientists more quote unquote productive because they're able to publish more and get more citations. I think it was 26% more citations off the top of my head. I could be wrong about that, but a significant increase in citations. But what was happening is that AI was pulling everyone into a median position, into a common position. So there's less exploration that happens when we use AI. And we're seeing this just straight out. We're seeing this, right? People are becoming more like each other. They sound like each other. They sound like the models. And we're seeing what you were saying about what's the value of the business when everyone's just going to have access to the same models that do the same thing. There are stylistic differences, and there are certainly differences if you have your own data, but in the end, they don't operate like humans. We haven't got that breakthrough for continual or real-time learning. We don't have any breakthroughs, and I don't think we will, about this true innovative capacity that biological intelligence has for what we call the adjacent possible, which is a very local, very precise, very specific effect that will only happen when humans have AIs that they're operating themselves as opposed to a centralized top-down AI. I think that there's a lot of ways that this is going to play out, and thinking about it as a complex system is a huge advantage because you can see interactions and impacts and effects and changes that when you apply a pure sort of linear thinking and reductionist thinking, which is what a lot of the leaders talk, you miss these subtleties that end up becoming the whole story.
May I ask, and again, just to take it back to metrics, so the places I spend the most time are Canada, the US, and Colombia. I have a lot of family in Colombia. Now, in each of these countries, there's a cultural context that's important. In Canada right now, there's a productivity crisis. The government, policymakers, entrepreneurs, everybody's obsessed with how can we increase productivity. It's a very specific measure. In the US, it's being first in almost everything, as we saw with the hockey games this weekend. But then in Colombia, it's about GDP per capita. It's about poverty. What can we do to shift the conversation from these top-level KPIs when policymakers are really just pandering for votes generally?
That's a very good question, and I'm not sure I have the crispest of answers. They're all very different. I know, obviously, the United States the best and the others to some sort of declining impact or declining effect. The productivity question, I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with being focused on productivity. The question is how we're thinking about productivity. There's productivity, which is just your pure sort of output, sort of economic statistic. The question is what you do with that and how you think about it. And that's where we get into this sort of question of automation as potentially a pretty toxic factor that can be put into productivity. If you have a certain number of people and there's a certain amount of output, and you throw in a bunch of machines to essentially increase the output without changing the number of humans, that could be a good thing, right? We could have more output, same number of people, everybody's working, the output is greater, there could be more economic output per person. But if what you're doing is saying, I need to increase my productivity as a company, right? I could also do that by reducing the number of people, and maybe I'm increasing the output, maybe I'm not, but my ratio of productivity has gone up, right? And that overall, that could work at one scale, but at another scale, then you have the problem of mass unemployment. And it's hard here is we have an industry that is actually focused on that outcome, right? They want that outcome because if their models are replacing human labor, that's creating the market for them. And that's the easiest thing that they can do, right? Whereas what we need to do is actually push for people to think about using these tools differently, to think about creating them differently, so that what we're doing is adding to and creating new capacities that we couldn't have before. This is not new to technology. eBay created a possibility of trading across the globe that literally would not have existed without the internet. Just couldn't have happened. There's no way you could have created eBay without the internet. Think about mobile and, at least if you use the mobile app from Starbucks, you couldn't place an order to pick up a coffee while you're driving unless Starbucks started to have a huge call center that could route it, which would be a complete logistical disaster and a nightmare. So it gave a new capability for people to do something that wouldn't have existed without mobile. We haven't really gotten to that. We're having to push ourselves to use these tools in ways that are additive. And that's truly possible. And we do it all the time, and everybody else can too. But the broader narrative is making that harder, because the broader narrative is about actually replacing humans rather than adding to us.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say about the sort of different cultural positions around what matters in the economy is what you're pointing to, the frame that individual economies and people have about these things. Like Canada, New Zealand's gone through quite an obsession with productivity as well as a single metric. And that came about because of some comparisons between New Zealand and Australia. We just love to do that. Who's it, the All Blacks or the Wallabies that are winning, that kind of thing. Productivity is really important because it makes so many other problems easier to solve if you have good productivity. But of course, most people stop hearing at that point, and because the next part is the productivity and wages they went apart from each other a number of decades ago. What does that mean for workers and capital versus labor? And then you get into conversations about redistribution and about are we taxing labor and capital in the same way? No, generally not. There's more tax on labor than there is in capital. It's a very general comment, in danger of getting out over my skis here. But I think that what we need to do is to, in the cultural context of any given economy, is to start having better conversations about what it is that people are seeing in that economy that is important to them. To go back to New Zealand, there was a whole kerfuffle that happened at the end of last year when someone high up in the government, I think, suggested that the reason that New Zealand had bad productivity figures was because there's too many holidays and everyone goes to the beach for a month in January. And that's probably true. You can't actually go away for a month and not expect that to show on the national productivity factors. But guess what? That's how
to go away to the beach.
That's how New Zealanders like to
That's
fly.
that's also been proven to mean that people have fewer sick days. So it actually, I think, from an economic standpoint, does even out.
And you're pointing out a really important thing, which is that there's a flip side to all of this, right? That yes, it has a downstream effect in terms of fewer sick days or higher engagement at work or whatever. So I tend to come back to something much more in the, are we solving more complex problems? And are people generally happier? I always find it fascinating to follow these studies about which countries are, quote unquote, the happiest. And they tend to be the least corrupt. They tend to have the biggest middle class. They tend to have upward mobility as a very important part of the economy. Very important that you can be born in poverty and move up. And those promises are vital. And what's AI doing for that? We'll see.
Okay, let's put that into a real scenario then, because one of the hot topics this past week has been this idea of the single person $1 billion company. And I think that is just the penultimate version of dehumanizing work, right? Is celebrating being able to raise yourself up to the detriment of having employees and building out the economy and giving back into building those communities. And I think for me personally, I just think it's bonkers because you're in the end just cannibalizing your own long-term value. But I think that this is going to have a really dramatic negative impact if this continues to be idolized a little bit. And so it brings me back to something that we talked about before, but I don't know if we've really brought up in this one yet, is this idea of the outcomes what is the outcome that they're getting by using your product or by interacting with your organization? And how do we measure that? How do we quantify or qualify even what that outcome is that you're creating?
Yeah. So the one person billion-dollar company, Sam Altman for that idea. There will always be anomalies. WhatsApp, Instagram, there's a handful of companies that got to have a significant valuation with a very small number of people. And they were products that were pure software that didn't need any really infrastructure of people to support because it was just the products as you know them now. And so a small number of people could put those together and put them out in the world. And there was a bit of a viral aspect that actually took off. That's great and good for them, right? Like they built something and they did it relatively efficiently and quickly, and they hit product market fit, as it's called, and things went to the moon. But those are true anomalies of businesses that can exist without a lot of people, because businesses require a lot of decisions, right? As Danny Kahneman said, an organization is a factory for decisions. So let's roll this out. You're going to have one person that's running a fleet of agents of some sort that's going to go off and create a billion-dollar company. You have to assume one of two things. One is that the agents are smart enough about the world, everything about the world, potential customers, suppliers, partners, competitors, that the agents can make all of the great decisions about the future. Or you have to assume that this one person at the top of the company has some superhuman decision-making capability and speed, right? That all the decisions that you would normally expect to happen inside an organization that's worth $1 billion is all going to be funneled up and taken care of one person. All that person's going to do all day long is make decisions and tell the agents what to do. Now, is it possible that someone like that exists for a certain kind of company in a certain kind of market in a certain moment in time? Sure, I guess it's possible. But do I think that's actually going to happen often? Not at all. There's another part of this which goes back to aggregate that up to the economy. If you have 100 people who are running billion-dollar organizations all by themselves, run that up to 1,000 or 10,000 or however many companies you are going to think are going to be run by a single person, what are the rest of us doing that are going to somehow become customers for these single person run billion-dollar companies, right? Like the math doesn't work at some point, that you can't have just a small number of people running massive big companies and have everyone else out of work, but still being viable customers of those companies.
This year, everyone's become obsessed with OpenClaw, CloudBot, whatever it is. And it effectively is this idea that we can orchestrate these businesses, that we can automate everything. Now, we just discussed what the implications of that are. But what I want to understand is, what does this idea of orchestrating entire businesses and knowledge and decision-making mean in terms of how we should be structuring businesses to have positive outcomes? And at the same time, a couple months ago, we spoke to Drs. Emily Bender and Alex Hanna about their book, The AI Con, and they voiced that we need to start a resistance against the businesses that don't support positive human outcomes. So these two things are colliding, which is the workers, the communities need to rise up in some form and make choices, either with their voices or their money. And then also the builders have a choice of what type of world they want to live in. What can we set forward as a bit of a roadmap to help the employees and the builders look forward in an optimistic and world building kind of way?
Start with the question about OpenClaw, whatever the name is right now. It is funny that something that went off like that changed its name like in the middle of its incredible growth. So the concept here is that as a system that's been where you can create an agent and put your agent into that system, and there's some level of autonomy that happens in terms of how those agents interact. There's a lot of question marks about exactly how much automation, how much people are actually having their fingers on the trigger, if you will, for their agents and what they want to do, and how many humans are actually in there pretending to be agents. There's all kinds of questions about what's really going on in the system. But yes, it's created this idea that agents can participate in some sort of system. They then can go on and create new things. And you're seeing these sort of interesting outcomes as this sort of collective starts to interact. It's interesting. It's an interesting experiment. I wish I knew a little bit more like true fact about exactly what's going on in there, but it's interesting to see how these things interact. This is not brand new. We've seen research that goes back a long time. Like I love there was a research from IBM.
It was after ChatGPT.
It was after ChatGPT.
2023, something.
They had ChatGPT agents talking to each other and figuring out what they did. And one of the best part of the whole research in my mind was that these agents spent a lot of time just chitter-chattering. Hey, what's up? Not much. How are you? Cool. Sweet. Like they're having like water cooler conversations because they learned to talk from humans. And we spend a lot of time talking. And on one side, that sounds like those agents are wasting time, right? The other way to think about that is that's how our human system works. That's how culture operates. All of those conversations help us understand each other better, right? So when you think about building an organization, saying we can create an organization that's run only by agents, what you're assuming there is that we understand how humans actually work together well enough to be able to instruct an agent how to create the same sort of collective that has the same sort of collective output. But I would venture to say we don't really understand how the partner in a law firm knows that they can't actually accept that term because they've seen their partner actually get freaked out or their client freak out over something like that. Or the marketing manager who knows that if they push that message, their engineering team's actually going to revolt and be ticked off about it. All of those personal dynamics about inside an organization, clients and vendors, how you actually work through is an unbelievably rich and beautiful part of human society that no one knows how to datafy. Like, there's no way to instruct an agent to know those things. And there's also a huge amount of what happens for humans that an agent won't be able to know. They don't have the same experience with other humans. They don't have the memory of how all of this has actually worked or not worked in the past. So while I think the agents could actually be really useful in certain ways, the idea that you're going to be able to pick up and move humans away and replace them all with agents, to me just feels a little bit fantastical, like in a way that like they don't understand humans. You do raise a good point, though, which is this question of how do you think about outcomes, right? And then we're thinking about what does it mean to measure? And I've heard you ask a couple of times about metrics, and I'm trying to allow my brain a little bit of time to think about it because I do really love metrics. And I'm not sure I've got one yet. Like, how do we measure that the output of an organization, whether that be a small company, a large company, a state, a society, or whatever like level of institution you like talk about, a school, a university, how do we provide a metric that says that this is something that's beneficial for humanity? I think there's probably still a lot more work to do to figure out what that is.
So the focus of your new book is on staying human. Can you give us a sense of what you've learned about how different people are using AI? Were there any fascinating examples of novel ways of elevating human cognition?
The most important part of what's come out of our research and is in the book Stay Human, and I'm exploring it live as more data comes in. But the most important part is this idea of authorship and cognitive sovereignty. It's about the fact that you're still able to essentially be the author of your own mind. And it is a parallel to what came out of the EU human rights work on and having a right to a future tense, that your future is more open with this technology. You have more agency. You have more self-awareness and insight. You have more ability to show up for others in ways that are really positive for the group. And we see in many examples of AI where people are doing that really well. They're honest about their use of AI, not to the point that they talk about every single prompt they use or anything like that, but they're honest in the sense that they're able to talk about how AI's made them see something in a different way, or they've been able to, even mundane things like an emergency room doctor who didn't have a translator available and had to explain something quite complex to someone who couldn't speak English, so used ChatGPT to do some of the communication and was somewhat surprised at how well that went, and then adjusted his own sense of professional identity to be a doctor who uses ChatGPT, not just a doctor. And So this is still very early. We're only a few years into this. But what we're seeing is that your ability to have AI in your thinking, and the reason that is a good thing is it means you're more engaged. You're less subject to automation bias where you just go, don't really care, I'll just copy, paste, and send it. You're engaged in it, you're learning, you're able to critique, you're being discriminatory, where your sense of identity is actually shifting, but it's shifting along the lines of kind of high integrity. Like you are able to be grounded in your professional standards. So it might be, if you're a lawyer, you're grounded in those professional standards. You're not trying to reinvent law when you shouldn't, that kind of thing. You want to.
What guardrails and strategies do you believe should be, or hopefully we will see adopted by these frontier model companies and big tech to drive that positive impact and ensure safer, more secure user experiences with AI?
Well, I see everything going in the opposite direction. Everything's sort of moving in the opposite direction.
But hope, where would you like it to go?
Well, first of all, you actually need to, for every dollar you spend on machine intelligence, spend $1 on human intelligence, that one. It's very hard to get funding for humans, whether it's training and learning and development and that kind of thing. The other is just this safety and usability and what humans actually want out of this. Those people struggle to get resources in companies right now.
Now, we've talked a lot about how we wish AI could impact us. We've talked a lot about what positive impact looks like. But let's be more grounded in the products that are out there today. What are some of the products that you are excited about because of what they're doing to improving cognition and expanding human capability and agency?
I got 3 ideas for you. One is a product called BAST, which is still very much in development. Some couple built by Beth Rudden and now Adam Cutler, both. And the important part about BAST is the foundation of trust at the core of the product. And so they've been working in the healthcare space. This is a space that you actually really need true level of trust. And so seeing a product start with that baseline of that is the core purpose of it, I think provides a very different outcome than what you'd be expecting from other systems. The second idea is one of incorporating new and or differentiated data sources. The best example is a product called Latimer. Again, someone who's spoken at our summit, John Pasmore, is one of our advisors. He has built Latimer. It's technically a RAG system. It has a proprietary data set that it uses. It's providing responses. And it was designed originally to better represent Black and Brown history and culture. And so John has assembled a data set that doesn't exist anywhere else. It is some data that's just literally that's not available on the internet. There's some data that's never been digitized before. And in the process of building Latimer, he's digitized it. So he has, historical letters of Frederick Douglass that are not available anywhere on the internet. So there's no way for any other LLM to actually have that as part of its resource to understand how to answer questions. When you chat with Latimer, you get a very different point of view. You get a different answer. You get a different population that's represented. And it has become quite popular across universities as an alternative so that you can talk to different LLMs to get different kinds of answers. He's a great example of what we will be much further in the future in terms of ways to think about bringing different data sources to LLMs. The third idea is one that I find really intriguing, especially based on my old history of building tools for creatives, is the sort of systems that are thinking about how to bring AI into the creative process and how to be an assistant to a creative during the process, not to be a one and done of here's my prompt, please give me a picture back mid-journey, but it's more how do I incorporate this? And so I'm thinking of tools like Fuser or Open Studio, and there's a handful of others, some of which I've been able to try, some I'm just seeing as kind of announcements, but I haven't really been able to use them yet. I find that to be really fascinating. There is, as I said earlier on, like an AI can help bring an outside view to something you're thinking about or doing that you don't have. It can give you a different lens. It's just like having somebody sitting over your shoulder, if you could, to help you through and inspire you with a new idea that maybe you haven't come up with. And I think we're just at the very beginning of what tools like that could do to be assistants and helpers in the creative process in terms of what their sort of imagination is. In addition to the actual creative process, AI broadly has been around in creative tools for a very long time. And when it was 25 years ago that we put wire removal into Final Cut Pro. So it's been 25 years since we've had some form of AI in creative tools. Like we put wire removal in Final Cut Pro like that long ago. But now we're starting to see much more interesting, sophisticated stuff, being able to remove elements, change them out, color swap them, do all kinds of really interesting things. That's an accelerant to a creative's ability to do something new and different. So I find those to be really attractive, a strong bias to the creative community. We always have some form of artist that's contributing to our summit, musicians and artists and painters and sculptors. And we don't want to see this technology be something that people get used to creativity that's not human. And there's no reason for that to be. It's definitely something that an AI can work with you to blow your mind and come up with something different. It doesn't have to replace the human creative process.
So we touched on two things. So one is the Artificiality Summit, which you run every year. And then also, Helen, you have a book coming out called Stay Human. When is your book Stay Human coming out? And also, you've been doing a great job of kind of seeding out chapters. So where can people find that? And then very lastly is also just a shout out for your summit in 2026 in October. Who should be attending that?
Well, I do take care of the books. So Stay Human is going out chapter by chapter every week. We're working on the print options at the moment, but at the moment it's online and it's free. It's just on our side in the journal. And the summit is in October.
Yep. So our site, if you don't put it, you can put it in the notes, is artificialityinstitute.org. And all of our publications are on a subdomain journal.artificialityinstitute.org. And right up there, you can find the books. So the summit is this October, the 22nd to 24th in Bend, Oregon. It's an opportunity to get away, unless you happen to be lucky enough to live here with us. But it's a way to get away, to go to the mountains and think and to hope and to imagine something different. And it's a great collection of researchers and technologists and designers and artists and psychologists and philosophers. And we come together with
space explorers.
We have space explorers. We have an amazing group of people coming again this year. And it's always people who are coming from, there's definitely some people who are very much in the AI space, but the majority of people are actually coming from outside of it to try and interrogate it and understand it. And that diversity of idea, that transdisciplinary approach is very much what this is about. It's not a sales conference. It's not a deal conference. It's a gathering that's very immersive. It's 2.5 days, and the full days are 12 hours. We eat together, we talk together, we explore, we walk in the woods together. So it's definitely a very human gathering to figure out what it means to be human in this era.
Thank you for listening to the Product Impact Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow us and leave a comment to inform the conversation.